A pleasant good morning, everyone. My name is Dr. Mina Rambokas. I am the Deputy Dean for Planning and Programming in the Faculty of Social Sciences. I want to say special welcome to the members of the campus executive management team, deans and deputy deans, heads of departments, members of our campus community, captains of industry, members of media, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning. On behalf of the Business Development Unit, I want to thank you for joining us in our virtual breakfast meeting on the topic of the value of being emotionally intelligent for business resilience. The Business Development Unit supports the Faculty of Social Sciences by providing training and services to our local and regional business community and public service. We are focused on short-term training workshops in the area of data science, digital marketing, leadership, business communications, data analytics, customer service, and many more. We also offer customized training for business and public service. We offer as well research services and consultancy services. Last year, the Business Development Unit hosted a series of initiatives focused on building an effective COVID-19 response. This year, we are continuing with our engagement with the primary focus on building business resilience. Today's meeting draws our attention to the need to develop and practice emotional intelligence in our business environment. The research shows that emotionally intelligent people are better performers than their counterparts, and that emotional intelligence has a positive influence on various work-related outcomes. So this is really the start of our discussions on emotional intelligence. And we will continue our conversation as we go on in the weeks to come. In fact, I take this opportunity to invite you to our 4-day seminar next week on emotional intelligence, where we will focus on providing practical tips on how to consciously evolve and adapt to our changing environment. So it is without delay that I hand you over to our Business Development Coordinator, Dr. Cherise Permel-Hutton, who will introduce our moderator, Mrs. Shian Ottley-Reid, and our distinguished panel members. Thank you very much for joining us. Cherise?
Thank you very much, Dr. Rambokas. It is indeed my pleasure and my honor to briefly introduce this phenomenal panel. But before I do so, please permit me to firstly thank each member for readily accepting our invitation and taking the time out of their very busy schedules to be a part of this discussion on this very important topic of emotional intelligence in today's business landscape. We have with us today our moderator, Mrs. Shian Ottley-Reid, industrial and organizational psychologist. Shian is a psychometric and human behavior expert, as well as leadership coach. Also on our panel are 3 very influential voices, really captains of industry, as Dr. Rambokas said, as well in their own right and in academia as well. And I would love to present to you Mr. Adam Sabga. He is the sector head for the construction sector of the Ansa McCall group of companies. I also wish to present Dr. Amala Luncheon, co-author of the book Everyday Lessons in Emotional Intelligence, a Caribbean Perspective. She is also a management professional. And last but certainly not least, Mr. Nigel Edwards, Executive Director of the Trinidad and Tobago Unit Trust Corporation. He is here with us this morning to weigh in on this very important conversation. So I now hand you over to our moderator for today's highly anticipated conversation, Mrs. Shian Ottley-Reid. Shian.
Thank you, Dr. Permel-Hutton. I noticed that Mr. Batiste has also joined the panel. So there he is, I see him. Hi. And I guess I will, sure, go ahead.
Thank you. So we have with us as well, Mr. Nigel Baptiste, and he is the President and Chief Executive Officer of Republic Financial Holdings Limited and the Managing Director of Republic Bank Limited. Thank you so much for joining us this morning, Mr. Baptiste.
Great, thanks again. So we are going to have an exciting conversation about a topic that is very near and dear to my heart, emotional intelligence and the importance relative to business resilience. And of course, both terms have gotten a lot of airplay during this whole COVID journey. Emotional intelligence is a construct that has been around for a long time. I think Daniel Goldman's work is in the late 90s around EI and around the 4 constructs of EI. And I kind of would like our panelists to kind of briefly just say something about themselves that they'd like to share, but also just kind of let us know what emotional intelligence really means to them as an individual. At this point, I mean, anyone can start. Let me put someone on the spot. Nigel E., let's start with you.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Sure. Yeah, so I guess both Nigels are in financial services, and many people would think that financial services is a very sort of hard environment, and you know that numbers and dealing with money requires a sort of hard-nosed approach. So maybe I could start by saying I consider myself a very genteel and emotively sensitive person. And whether you believe that or not is a different issue. So having said that as in my introduction, in describing what EI means to me, I think it's a very simple construct actually, in that, you know, I understand that people are complex and people have sort of layered parts of their personality and who they are. And so to me, emotional intelligence is understanding some of the several intangibles, including feelings that people bring to decision making. And so in a business context for me, leveraging the understanding of that emotion and leveraging how people's feelings affect their performance is critical to determining how they accomplish their business outcomes. And so to me, it is that issue of leveraging people's emotions, leveraging my own understanding of my emotions and how those two things interface with each other, and pairing that with business outcomes.
I need to unmute. Thank you so much for that. How about Adam, before I go to the other Nigel? So Adam, you want to share with us kind of your perspective as well in terms of EI?
Morning, everyone. And firstly, thank you for having me on this distinguished panel and being part of this very relevant topic. In regards to EI, I see emotional intelligence as being conscious and cognizant of how you impact others and how others impact you and how that comes across. Nigel spoke about leveraging that in a business sphere, and he's spot on in that regard. But it's about being, to me, being genuine, being authentic, and just having that true line of connection with an individual at the core. And that is what I see as the underlying pillars of what EI is, and how we as business leaders need to tap into that to drive our business and our strategies moving forward.
Great, thank you for that. Nigel B.
Thank you, Shian, and good morning to you, and good morning to all of the participants, and good morning to my fellow panelists as well. So I would say, as Nigel E. indicated, I mean, we are both in the financial services sector, and there is all elements in the financial services sector. There is the strictly numbers aspect of it, but a bigger aspect of it is actually the people aspect. And I think it's that people aspect that we'll be talking about a little bit this morning. And for me, emotional intelligence is all about awareness. Awareness first of yourself, awareness of your own triggers, awareness of how you trigger other individuals, and secondly, awareness of other people. And I think that, and I hope as we explore it during the course of this morning's session, that it's sometimes very hard to draw a distinction between the personal and the professional. There's a lot of overlapping. And I also believe that there's no constant state, that emotional intelligence in an individual, either professionally or personally, moves along a spectrum.
For sure.
And so we all find ourselves at different points in that spectrum, at different periods of time, and even during one interaction with someone. So that's what emotional intelligence is to me. Awareness, there's a range, and a lot of overlapping.
Great, thank you so much for that. You've kind of touched on something that's important, I think, for us to kind of see. Sometimes emotional intelligence is presented as an absolute. You either have it or you don't. You either are it or you're not. And I think it's important what you're saying about the continuum, as well as I kind of equate emotional intelligence to a muscle. So you use it, you strengthen it. You don't use it, it's still present, but it's not as strong. And so you also have that conscious decision to use the muscle. And so I think that's really important in terms of what you're saying. And I've kind of flipped things a little bit today, because usually we go with ladies first, but I kind of flipped it a little bit this morning. And so I want to ask Dr. Amala to kind of share with us her perspective about EI, and a little bit about her work in terms of EI from a Caribbean perspective as well. I think would be very interesting for us and for all the participants.
Thank you so much, Shian. I am incredibly happy to be here and happy to see that everyone knows what emotional intelligence is. I mean, if we went around getting definitions, I think everyone was spot on. So thank you, gentlemen, for doing your homework. Women don't usually give out praise so generously. So, you know, I'm sure that I can speak for Shian when I say we are both happy that you guys have done your homework. Nobody's wrong, because there are several different ways that people express emotional intelligence. However, there are specific tenets that actually belong to emotional intelligence. And the first one really is self-awareness. So understanding who you are as a person and being able to express that, understanding who other people are, understanding their emotions. And then the main thing is being able to affect the relationships between you and whomever else. So those things are really important, and those things make up what emotional intelligence is. I would just touch a little bit on something that Nigel B. raised, where he was saying whether or not you should be able to divide personal and professional. I like when people show up as who they truly are. Then you understand in your business setting, if they're socially aware and if they're self-aware, then they understand how to temper it. So maybe that is what we need to encourage people to do. So show up as who you truly are, but then, you know, in a business setting, then, you know, I might not want to drink beer at my desk, you know, because it's frowned upon. So that's when you would have coffee or tea or whatever. You don't speak above a certain elevated volume in your office, but you can do that outside on the playground, you know. So being able to understand those things and have those social cues, those things are also very important in terms of emotional intelligence. From a Caribbean perspective, I think that we have strayed away a little bit from having the village raise us, which is where I think we get a lot of our emotional intelligence from. But now adults can't talk to children that don't belong to them. You know, you try to deal with your own children and don't try to discipline my child, kind of thing is what we've come to. However, that shows up in the workplace in a way that we don't necessarily like it. So if we could get back to some of that village mentality, it would be helpful.
Thanks so much for that. And just to echo, in terms of, I'm actually seeing the chat as we're talking, and even participants are defining emotional intelligence in a very interesting way. But there are very clear constructs. So we have self-awareness, we have self-management, we have empathy and understanding situational awareness. And then you have relationship management. And so you can either see it as a continuum, you can see it as 4 quadrants, you can see it as building blocks. But it's definitely important to start with self, as I think most of the gentlemen shared. But we sometimes think of emotional intelligence as being aware and stopping there. So I know I'm this way and this is how I am and this is how I show up, without the okay, but there's certain things I need to recognize about triggers, or my behavior may trigger others. I don't always get the response or understand the response. So I think there's the step beyond. In terms of business resilience, I'm going to ask a question here. And any of the panelists could kind of start. I'm not going to put anybody on the spot. But was there anything in particular in the last, God, I've lost track, 24 months, I guess, this month, our COVID journey kind of began. Is there anyone who kind of wants to speak to how emotional intelligence during this period has helped the business in terms of being more resilient?
I could take this for the team and start first.
Great, thank you, Adam.
The last 24 months have been challenging. They have certainly been months where I don't think anyone has stopped learning, because every day brought with it a new challenge or a new opportunity or a new construct that we needed to review. I can say in terms of business and in terms of emotional intelligence, and also in terms of what Ansel McCall has done and what we have managed to achieve, you know, all of those things are interlocked in the sense that from the point of running a business and from being an active leader, one looks at people and process. And in our businesses, we pretty much have streamlined processes that allow us to operate on a point of continuum without resistance. But what the last 24 months did for us was it put a pin in our connectivity and our ability to connect with our people. We lost touch. People were working from home, people were working remotely. We were shut down for 2 months. It brought with it a whole barrage of challenges that we never experienced before. I don't think in anyone's business continuity plan, they ever conceptualized how would you operate your business for 24 months without being able to operate your business. So what the Ansel McCall group did, and was obviously very biasly, very impactful, was we started a daily huddle at 8 o'clock in the morning, where every single member of the Ansel McCall leadership came together. And we were there for about an hour, hour and a half every day. And what initially started as crisis management slowly turned into emotional management, dealing with the mental problems and the mental challenges, dealing with the health, the well-being. And that voice and that posture and that position from up top became so inspirational, so infectious. It spread throughout the group to a point where within the pandemic management, we were not talking about profit, we were talking about people. And it became so inculcated into what we were doing that even now, when the restrictions are easing up, it's so deeply entrenched in our being. I mean, this slogan here, together we are family, has never been lived into in a more powerful way as it did during the pandemic. So I hope that answered the question.
For sure, thank you so much. Does anyone else want to add in terms of what EI has done for the resilience of the business?
Yeah, maybe I can just piggyback off of where Adam ended, because I think when that starts happening, Adam, one of the things that you find is that you build so much more employee engagement. There's much greater alignment between where you are as an organization and where the team is, and I feel, you know, my sense of that is that in itself lends itself to the resilience and the resilience of the company. It's not dissimilar to what you described. I'll just perhaps sort of personalize that a little bit, just by giving an example of at a personal level of an employee during the height of the pandemic. One of the things that, so I can move down, of course, we're an essential service, so our company was open throughout the pandemic. And so I frequented the area where people were interfacing with customers and the public. About 40% of our employees moved to work from home, but the other 60% had to be here. And of course, frontline team members had to be dealing with the public. And one day, it was like 8:30 in the morning. It was one of these days, you know, you remember those days they would come in and you have the sanitization team fogging the place and sanitizing it. And right after they had done that, I looked across and there was this, there's a young member of the branch sobbing uncontrollably off to the side. And so, you know, so of course went up and sort of tried to comfort that person, and also just brought the team together in a huddle and just to understand what was happening. But you know what was interesting, maybe about 2 days after, I went back to find out, you know, just how that particular person was. And, you know, in post that whole immediate crisis, this person says, you know, that small act is something that they will never forget. And they ascribe that not just to you personally, but they ascribe that to the organization showing care, attention, and I think that connection, because the organization doesn't have a personality outside of its leaders, and so I think just that ability to create a connection based on where people are and to respond and to react to where people are emotionally based on your own knowledge of what would I want. And once you do that, you create a certain type of loyal, aligned team member that you have won over for life. And that, to me, is what really builds resilience.
Yes, thank you so much for that, Nigel E. Nigel B.
Yeah, so what I can add, I mean, I agree with what Adam and Nigel E. has said, you know, and from a resilience perspective, what the last 24 months has really done, you know, it really showed the importance of the people side of the resilience. And in a financial institution, there are really two sets of peoples. You know, you have the employees on the one hand, and you have the clients on the other hand. And, you know, you recognized throughout that COVID period how important it was that you were tuned in to the requirements on either side, and assumptions that would have prevailed or would have been present prior to the commencement of COVID. In, let's say in Trinidad, for Trinidad, it was in March really of 20. The assumption that you had were quickly cast aside. You know, once you were in tune, and for example, you recognized that while the financial sector employees were safe in terms of their jobs, okay, they were just one part of a household. And so you couldn't treat that household or that employee, you know, one way and not take into consideration the wider household. You know, it was to another level when you come to the clients, because the entire household might then have been affected. And on top of everything else, you have financial well-being, but then you have physical well-being.
Yeah.
which also needs to be taken into consideration, so that even if you could have overcome the financial well-being concerns, there will still be physical well-being concerns. And so that COVID period, I believe, would have grown many leaders throughout the world, whether they wanted to grow or they didn't want to grow. They would have grown. Okay? And that is certainly something that's going to be a part of the new way as we move forward, even though it might have happened by force. But I think it will, for the future, have built great resilience into all of those organizations, because we've had a crash course in the identification of what is important.
For sure. I mean, if you use that, I mean, if I extend my muscle analogy a little bit, what COVID did was make us show up at the gym, even though we had been kind of driving past it all the time and saying, you know what, I really should go and start to look at my physique a little bit. COVID kind of plopped us in the middle of the gym and said, okay, well, you need to lift that 100-pound weight, so figure it out, you know?
Shian, if I could contribute a little bit more on the subject matter, and I think, you know, both Nigels touched on it as well, and I think it's very relevant in the sense that in emotional intelligence, the first point of it is the self-awareness factor. COVID-19 put us all, the entire universe, on the exact same page. I did not have to think what it's like to be a mother or a single parent or a father, if I was or I wasn't. I was a survivor of COVID-19. We're all in this together. So it made the self-awareness component that much easier to connect. So it brought us all on the same page. And I think through the pandemic, emotional intelligence almost naturally came to the front because we were all in it together. So we're all on the same topic.
You know, Adam, to that point, not only was it self-awareness, but it was also empathy, which is a huge component of EI. And when you think about empathy, we often think about putting ourselves in other people's shoes. I mean, that's almost the basic definition of empathy. I think the challenge we have sometimes is that we put ourselves in other people's shoes through our own lens, in our own reality, where COVID kind of made it everybody's reality. So it was no longer, this is my reality and I am trying to understand your reality through my own lens. But now I'm actually in your reality. We are in the same reality. So it brought empathy to a very real space. You know, I think when you think of just all the experiences, you know, it was the globe experienced this pandemic together. The globe experienced death and illness and pain and socioeconomic challenges together. So it wasn't this, I mean, if you think about it, there's a war going on in the world right now, but there's a very different perspective to what happened during COVID. And the empathy is different because again, it is easier to be empathetic with people that you identify with. And I think that's what COVID did. It made all of us identify with each other in a very real way and be able to be empathetic. I think,
Shian, I think that's a very important point that you and Adam are raising, you know, because what transpires, you know, with empathy and with, you know, walking in somebody's shoes, it is always pre-COVID, it was always something that you did, and in your mind, it was a temporary something. You know, I will put myself in your shoes, but I know I didn't really have to stay in your shoes. So I will put myself there. And then after I've walked in it for a little bit, you know, I come back out and I put back on my own shoes.
Mm-hmm.
right.
And they're totally different mindset.
Mm-hmm.
And what Adam was saying there about the empathy and all of us being in it, for me, the first challenge really was dealing with yourself. Because, I mean, I know my financial well-being was probably not threatened, but still, you know, there was a doubt in your mind that you had to grapple with your own demons.
Mm-hmm.
And so you were not putting yourself in somebody's shoes temporarily and being empathetic to somebody, you know, and then after you disengage from that experience, you kind of go back to whatever your regular state of mind was. You notice something, you actually had to live there and because you didn't know how long you had to live there, you had to arrive at some degree of comfort in that position. And I think just all of us having to do that. And I mean, everyone had to do it, but for the leaders, they had an extra responsibility inside there, because while you were doing that, you were actually having to put yourself in somebody else's shoes, but you actually was staying in that shoes now for much longer than maybe in other in other situations. And that has made, that has, as I said, I mean, it's really a crash course has opened up so much for so many people, myself included.
I see Dr. Amala moving around in her chair, so let's hear from you.
Yes, because I think that we have to acknowledge that the pandemic meant, or well, we're still in it, so it means different things to different people. Everybody didn't have the same level of suffering. As Nigel alluded to, his financial well-being was not threatened. And so what I think it is important for us to do going forward is understand that we need to have some level of vulnerability. And so just saying that his financial well-being was not threatened, I think is an open statement, and it's a welcome statement, because people are not necessarily as vulnerable in situations like that. People look at vulnerability as weakness. Vulnerability is a strength. And if you're coming to someone to say, because vulnerability essentially is what I want to see from you, but I never show you that. And that vulnerability is where we need to start, because there's so many people who became millionaires in this pandemic. There are people who've lost their lives, and there are people who still don't know what they're going to do moving forward. There are people who haven't had breakfast today, you know, so it really is not equal. And we talk about showing empathy and walking in people's shoes and so on, and that sounds good, but not everybody does it. So I was really happy to hear Adam say that they have a huddle in the morning and so on. That is impressive, because it doesn't happen everywhere. Also, we need to look at how we define resilience, because resilience really, when I think of resilience, I think of, let's say, large buildings in places that are prone to hurricane. So you make a building that will withstand that wind and whatever, and it comes back to its original position. Let's not try to do that with the pandemic. So what we need to do is grow beyond where we were initially, and don't try to get back to where we were. But everything that we've learned about our employees and wanting them to be engaged and showing up as their authentic selves. And I saw a comment where someone says, engagement is about being able to take off the mask. Engagement, a lot of engagement is actually on the company. If employees show up as who they truly are, what are you doing to make sure that people want to stay in your employ? What are you doing within your community to ensure that people are proud to say, you know, I work at X bank or Y bank or whatever? Those are the things. And keeping people engaged is very simple, because it's not always about money. If you're building up communities, you know, little things like making sure roundabouts are clean, bus stops look good, you know, that kind of thing. They may be small, they don't cost you a lot, but then people in the community will say, oh, well, maybe I want to work there, you know, and it sort of gives you that brand recognition that you need.
I mean, Dr. Amala, I completely agree. And I think we, you know, resilience, engagement, I think it's really important that we're talking about authentic leadership as well. We're talking about people, the vulnerability that you're talking about. It's important that you really are authentic in the way that you communicate. So, and again, that's a huge part of EI. If we talk self-awareness, it's about being authentic. It's not about knowing and then masking, because that doesn't engage in an emotionally intelligent way. It's really about knowing, owning, even your unconscious bias sometimes, knowing where some of those biases lie. Asking for feedback is very important as leaders. I guess, and then
listening when you get the feedback.
Definitely listening, for sure.
Listening, I always talk about active listening, because sometimes we listen just to respond, and then you dismiss that response. You know, it's like, all right, yeah, we had this conversation, but have you internalized, you know, what was said? Are you encouraging your employees, or are your employees understanding that they can manage up, which is something that I always advocate. If you don't like something, you have to be able to say it in a way that whomever your boss is not offended by it and you get punished and so on. So that too is allowing people to show up as who they truly are, because they should understand that they have a responsibility to be respectful with what they say and so on, but understanding that it could be taken in a way that there could be change, because essentially what people want is change.
And that the leaders are interested in change. I want to ask a question in terms of, when did EI kind of come up on your radar as leaders? When did the term EI start surfacing? When did you decide you had to kind of work that muscle?
For me, so the term EI, let me put it this way. So as a very young, sort of post studies, must have been 27, 28 years old. And I've worked for a short period at a UK investment bank. And for the first time, I came upon this concept of something called relationship management. That was a phrase that they used for people who, there were some guys who were really extraordinary at managing just relationships and managing interactions with people. And that was the first that I became aware of it. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. And so, I was going to tell you how long ago that was, but let me leave it at the fact that I was sort of mid-20s, so you wouldn't know how long ago that was. But what that did is it got me on a search for becoming more aware of the need to manage relationships, and of the utility of managing relationships. And that's when I started paying attention to EI. And what I found, so many people who know me may think what I'm about to say is so unlike me, but in some of my early days, I could have been a little bit rough, so one of the memories that I have is I started responding to a particular email from a colleague. And the first line of my email in response was, "This is a foolish email. This is a foolish message." And then I went on to explain why. And what I then discovered, so Shian, to your point about EI being a muscle, is understanding that managing relationships was important, understanding that being aware of my own emotion and my own emotional state, and being responsive to someone else's. So trying to figure that out and trying to discover how to manage that. A big part of that for me was managing my blind spots, because even when you become self-aware, there are areas that you don't see. So people tell you something. I didn't see that saying to somebody that that this is a foolish email was a bad thing. But when I understood how when that person explained how that made them feel, that sort of illuminated the blind spot, right? So that sort of illumination of the blind spot then took me on a journey to be more conscious. And of course, that started evolving and expanding to the point where there's a sense in which I'm a completely different human from the human that was 27 odd years old. And so, I suppose I've been in the gym for a long time, and I also recognize that continuing in the gym is important, because so the way that I respond to my sons, to my I can't say kids, the young men, is also reflective of the fact that there are blind spots, and understanding the blind spots in one sphere versus another. That's also important, and it's just sort of different. A different variety or different layer of looking inward and constantly evolving and changing.
Great.
Let
Thank
me
you
just
so
say,
much.
let me just say quickly that we're talking about using it as a muscle. That would imply that we all have it. You're not born with it. And I'm reading the chat. So that's why I'm saying that you're not born with it. Emotional intelligence is something you can learn. So it's not like cognitive intelligence where you're either
Exactly.
bright or you're not. No, emotional intelligence you can learn, and you can start with simple steps. And if I had to tell you one thing to do, what I would say would be to start with increasing your emotional vocabulary. So being able to describe how you feel, and stop with just the 5 or 6 words, where somebody asks you how you're doing. Oh, I'm fine. Fine could mean anything from I didn't have breakfast this morning to I lost my dog to I lost my job to, so you have to be able to describe in specific words what it is you're feeling. So start with increasing your vocabulary.
Dr. Amala, I want to take it a step even before that.
Mm-hmm.
I actually think we as individuals need to stop for a minute and actually assess what we are really feeling.
Of course.
Because very often when people ask us, even how you're doing, we have a stack response.
Yes, I'm fine.
And exactly.
What does that
and
mean?
I think even if you take it to self-awareness, it's really understanding, what am I really feeling in this moment?
Yes.
What does fine really mean?
Exactly.
Because if you were to ask people, why, how come you're good? We walk by and say, how are you doing today? Well, I'm good. Really? What was good about this morning?
Yes.
They are actually stumped. It's just that they have kind of said what they expected, what they thought you wanted to hear.
Right.
I also think from an AI perspective, we often, again, leaders in organizations are always looked at. It's like there is a spotlight, I do think it's important sometimes to recognize when you ask, how is someone doing, etc., that you give them some time to respond.
Wait for the response. Yes.
We often ask, how are you doing? And we keep
as a
walking.
greeting,
and they're literally like almost running behind you to answer, like,
yes.
Or I mean, I've tried it myself sometimes. Someone will say, how am I doing? And I'll say something really ridiculous, like, I'm okay. I saw some Martians drop from Mars this morning. And I recognize the person has no idea what I just said because they have moved on to their next activity. It didn't even resonate. So I just want to add, yes, there is the ability to describe, but there's also the moment of really defining, what do I feel in this moment? I would like to ask, I'm seeing the chat blowing up, and I know that we also have to go through a couple more questions before we get to the questions from the audience. So I want to ask if everyone has EI as a muscle, which I truly believe, it's fact. Do we think, the makeup of this panel is very interesting. Do we think there are any specific gender constructs when it comes to EI? Because is it easier for women to exhibit EI than men? Is it more of a feminine construct than a masculine construct? Is it more of a masculine construct than a feminine construct? I see someone in the chat also talks about ego. And so I'm curious to know let's start with flipping it again. Let's start from the male perspective. Do we think that there is any gender construct to EI or how it's viewed? Who's taking this one first? Let me see.
I'm willing to go. It's up.
All right.
So I think there isn't. I don't think there is.
Okay.
But I think that how it is viewed differently.
Tell me a little bit about that.
I think emotional intelligence might be viewed as a strength for men, and maybe interpreted as a weakness, right, for women. That's how I interpret it, because I have seen, and that's going back to one of the earlier comments when we talked about authentic leader and bringing your true self. I think we need to be very careful with that and maybe put a little asterisk, because sometimes we don't really want to deal with somebody's true self. So when we talk about authentic leadership, people think that authentic leadership might necessarily mean that how somebody is authentically good, right? You may not be. I just want to kind of make that point. But sure. Coming back specifically to the construct, I think there's no predisposition for either gender.
Gender, okay.
But what happens sometimes is because you don't expect, and maybe even this might be an unconscious bias on my part, because they don't expect that men might have emotional intelligence. When you see emotional intelligence being displayed by someone of the male gender, it tends to kind of say, oh, good, very good to see that this person, is sensitive to their feelings and sensitive to somebody else's feelings, and it's viewed as a positive. And for women, when you see someone who is kind of sensitive, because you expect that either maybe expected more, or you feel it's too much, and so it tends to take on, or could be interpreted negatively. I mean, that's how I view it. That's, if there's a distinction, it's how people interpret it.
Okay.
It is a muscle, as you were saying, and male and female alike have muscles. So I am absolutely neutral in that discussion. But going back to the question before, in terms of what we were discussing, there's 3,000 million different definitions of what emotional intelligence are. I know doctor may disagree, but it's what it means to you, because in what it means to you makes it genuine. And that is the success of emotional intelligence. People could smell through a bluff. So unless I genuinely care about you, I would know that I'm fake. And the person I'm interacting with will know that that person's fake. So where emotional intelligence comes into play, and I think the common denominator comes down to culture. The culture of the organization, regardless of male, female, black, white, whatever it may be. If the culture of the organization is open to being real, being authentic, listening with intent, then emotional intelligence comes to play. It has no gender bias, in my opinion. I interact with powerful male and female individuals, and they have shown me their vulnerabilities as I've shown them theirs, and mine, sorry. And that is why we connect at a level that allows us to do remarkable things. So I don't see gender being a part of it.
Thank you so much, Adam. Nigel quickly, then Dr. Amala, and then we're going to have to, I'll summarize a little bit, and then we'll have to open the floor for questions, because I'm seeing the chat there are lots of questions there, I think.
Yeah, I think, so I'm firmly in the camp that there's absolutely no difference, male, female, there's no gender distinction, differentiation. I think what tends to happen though is that there's perhaps a little bit of confusion between, let's call it emotional intelligence and emotional displays, and there may be a notion that that females may have a tendency to be more emotionally vulnerable, to be the ones who display their emotions more, and therefore, as Adam put it, anything to do with emotions may be ascribed to have a higher propensity in females. And I think that's furthest from the truth as it relates to emotional intelligence. I think emotional intelligence is something that you can develop. I've known the other members of this panel for several years, and I can tell you from experience with them, not only do I consider them to be adept at emotional intelligence and adept in terms of managing their emotion and responses and reaction, but I can also tell you that I have seen them develop it. And I really think that that's an important concept, the fact that emotional intelligence can be developed over time and developed with experiences. And so I think the notion of any sort of gender separation is absolutely untrue.
Great, thank you, Dr. Amala. Your perspective.
I am just going to jump in to say that socialization has a lot to do with it. And from a very tender age, we socialize boys to be tough, and, boys don't cry and that sort of thing. And so we end up with men who are not emotive and not empathetic. And you see it in the politicians, you see it in leaders of companies and so on. And I'm happy that everyone here is emotionally intelligent and their staff love them and they have these group huddles and so on. But I know people who work in organizations where their bosses don't care. And that is present day situation. So I think socialization has everything to do with it. And what we need to do as women and as nurturers, because we are given that sort of inherent behavior, what we need to do is encourage our men to talk. So when you ask whoever you're in a relationship with, whether that be work, friendship, whatever, once you ask a man a question, stop and listen for the answer, like we've said earlier, and encourage them to talk. Find out what's truly bothering them, because I believe that emotional intelligence could help us rid the society of criminal problems that we have. If people are able to talk about what they're feeling and stop expressing it, with violence.
In an aggressive way.
Yes, yes.
I want to just differentiate a little bit to Nigel B and Nigel E's point. Emotional intelligence is often kind of superimposed with emotionality or emotional behavior. And emotional intelligence is your awareness and your ability to manage emotions in a way that is constructive. And so I think it's important for us to recognize that emotional intelligence as a muscle can be developed, that emotional intelligence can be learned in terms of there are techniques to help you practice that muscle. There are reps, as you were, if you were in the gym, that you can do to build the muscle. And also that it's a conscious choice to want to behave in a way that builds relationships and builds communication and creates an authentic, open environment. So I want to thank all of you for your perspective. I think we've had a great conversation. I feel like this conversation could go on for a while, but I would like to open it up to some questions. So I want to hand back over to Dr. Pamela Hutton in terms of managing the chat.
Thank you, Shian. So we do have some questions. We will not be able to accommodate all. This is a riveting discussion, and the chat, has been blowing up. I will, however, take one question here that came from Mr. Albert Lee, and it is, what are the ways that we can develop AI in a Caribbean context? So we've been talking about building the muscle, but maybe we can get a little more specific in terms of some of those techniques.
So I can jump in, and then I'll ask Dr. Amala to jump in as well. I think one of the ways, so starting with the self-awareness element. So literally stopping a little bit and doing some assessment. Now, there are all kinds of, there are EQ assessments, there are self-assessments, there are things that you can use to help you kind of gauge where you are. What are some of your strengths? What are some of your competencies, etc., from an EI perspective? So I think self-awareness is the starting point. Caribbean or not, I think that our culture is one that is definitely more expressive on some level and then not expressive on another. So we have a very complex culture in the Caribbean. So we like to say that we are an expressive culture, but then when it comes to conflict, etc., we kind of pull back and we're uncomfortable with having those difficult conversations. I think, Dr. Amala, I don't know if there's anything specific in terms of building the muscle from a Caribbean context that you'd like to share?
I wouldn't say from a Caribbean context, because again, emotional intelligence is universal. However, from a personal perspective, what you need to do is be open to feedback. Allow people to criticize you, and they're not trying to beat you over the head. You want to ask somebody, well, listen, what do you think I could have done better in this situation? Or tell me something you don't like about me, with a view to fixing that. So you want to ask those difficult questions and actually listen for the response, and then don't get into, well, oh, I knew all along you didn't like me. No, that's because then you wouldn't get anything fixed.
Or even asking the question, what do you think I could do better? Because sometimes that question of like and dislike becomes defensive on both parts.
But you want to know, though. You want to know, like, if you watch, I have a podcast that I do with Jag, and we started this thing with asking difficult questions. And one of the questions that we had is, tell me something that you don't like. Or what is something you think I could do better? So ask that and listen for the response, and then understand, that you can help somebody else along the way.
But I think in starting, it's because to me asking those difficult questions, phrase like that, you actually have to have a trust between the two individuals.
Of course.
So starting with building the trust to be able to ask those kinds of questions is also important. Another question?
Yes, certainly. We've had quite a few. So this is the second question I would give. It says, what business outcomes do you think are likely to be most affected by EI?
Sure. Any of our captains of industry would like to take that question. What are the business outcomes that have been affected by emotionally intelligent leadership in your businesses? Nigel E, Adam.
We've seen our employee engagement rise significantly during this time, and a lot of that has to do with the way that we connected with the individuals with the team during the pandemic. In terms of business outcome, it's survival, it's evolution, it's being part of this mechanism that will never stop growing, never stop learning, and allows you to dial into the core competence of the core being of what an individual is, a living organism. So, I mean, I don't necessarily think I have a scientific answer to that question. I just see it as being able to continuously evolve and stay present. That's what I see it as.
Great, thank you. Anyone else? I mean, have any of you actually seen any tangible metrics as well? Or surprising metrics, maybe?
Yeah, I mean, it's a tough one to respond to, but I guess maybe I can speak to it by just thinking about what we have seen during 2020 and 2021 in terms of our increase in actual outcome, our funds under management. In that period of time, our total funds under management has grown by, I guess, just over 7%. At the time when people are sort of, the number of people who've either lost their jobs or whose income severely constrained, and there's generally a slowdown in people's ability to invest. But we've seen a tremendous amount of growth over that period of time, and a large part of that is I think attributable to the fact that, of course, with the number of things that we're doing, so it's not just this. But I think there's been an increase. The increased engagement that I spoke to, the fact that when we did things that showed people that we actually care for them during the pandemic, whether it was special allowances, so at one point, for example, we were providing, when transportation was down to 50%, we would send special maxi taxis by area, bringing people into our various investment centers. So people felt this sense of caring, and I think that went a long way. So when I just reported to our board not too long ago that we saw $20 million, which represents 20 million on 300, so that's about 7% increase in our revenue. That was specifically attributable to increase funds under management during 2021. And so, to the extent that there is a measurable outcome, that's the only statistic that I can give you. But I honestly think that the outcomes that you see are longer term, because once people start, people engage at the level of heart with anything, and including with their jobs and with wanting to see the organization succeed. And I think that will be lasting as you go, not just well beyond 2020 and 2021.
Excellent. Thank you so much. I am recognizing and I'm cognizant of the time, and I know that this conversation could go on for a long time. I know Dr. Amala shared her information. I'll also say that I can be contacted on our social media platforms as well, Shian Ottley-Reid. And I mean, I do a lot of EI coaching, development, assessment, and constant discussion about it, because it's a really interesting topic as it evolves. So I'm going to hand back over to Dr. Rambucas or Dr. Pirmal Hutton, I'm not sure which one, is going to kind of close off at this point.
Thank you so much, Shian. And we are also cognizant of the time. It is 10 o'clock and we are still seeing so many insightful questions coming through in the chat. It is certainly a conversation that will be continued. It must be continued if we are to be resilient in these times. So let me just take the opportunity now.
Maybe, can I suggest something that maybe if you could capture some of the questions, maybe we could answer them and circulate at some point?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And we will be able to do that. So we will do that and respond accordingly. So let me take this opportunity to deliver a very brief vote of thanks. I must say that we cannot express enough our thanks to this extremely captivating panel for the nuggets of wisdom that have been shared this morning. I mean, it has been a phenomenal experience, one which we promised and one which we delivered on. So on behalf of the Business Development Unit, I wish to thank our wonderful moderator, Mrs. Shian Ottley-Reid, our distinguished panel of speakers, Dr. Amala Luncheon, Mr. Nigel Batiste, Mr. Adam N. Sabga, and Mr. Nigel Edwards for their time and invaluable discourse this morning. Also heartfelt thanks to the participants. We're still seeing things coming through in the chat. So thank you for attending and contributing to this discussion in such a lively way. And it would be remiss of me if I did not thank the hardworking team at the University of the West Indies to ensure the smooth flow of today's proceedings. So as we said, this conversation can be continued. You can also achieve a certificate of completion in emotional intelligence from our professional development program. And it will be facilitated by none other than Mrs. Shian Ottley-Reid. So if you want to hear more from her and engage her more, please attend. We have a few spaces remaining and we have put the information in the chat and we will reach out via email. Thank you so much. This is the end.
Thanks a lot. Everyone
Thank
have
you,
a
everyone.
great day.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks again.
Yeah.